Welcome to Studio 9. Our podcast is called Studio 9. The reason why it's called Studio 9, I always explain to everybody. I was going to call it the Stupendous Podcast, but people are sick of, I think, the Stupendous thing. And I said to Mikey, who does all the audio and video stuff for us, I said, where are we recording? Where are we building the studio? And he's like, oh, we're in Studio 9. I went, that's the name of the podcast, because Stu is still in the word studio.
Nice.
Right? See
Yep.
what I did there?
Absolutely.
So, this is my question. So I messaged you before I had a chance to connect with you, and I said, I reminded you, remember what question?
Oh, right. To ask me about my name.
Ask you about your name.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I asked that was because I've known you for a few years.
Yeah.
4 years. I met you 4 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. Almost 4 years ago anyway. And you, the first introduction to you was Dr. G, which I never felt comfortable calling you because, like, we're friends.
Yeah.
But I was like, it's like you call me, like, DJ Jazzy Stu. Right?
Which I now will forever from this moment.
Okay, so DJ Jazzy Stu and Dr. G
in the house.
Yeah, we're in the house.
In Studio 9.
So you go Dr. G, it's like your brand.
It's my brand, right?
Right? And so when you're on TV, you're Dr. G. When you're your website, you're Dr. G. Your podcasting, you're Dr. G.
Right.
Your books, you're Dr. G.
Yep.
I've covered it all?
Yeah. Even in the office, actually, which is where it started.
Oh, okay. So just because you're Deborah Gilboa.
Right. And it turns out that when patients were calling to make appointments, they could not say Gilboa. So our front office person would say, you want Dr. G? And they'd be like, yeah.
It's way cooler.
Yeah. And that was before I
no
ever
offense
had
to
a
your last
website.
name, but Dr. G is pretty cool.
It is.
It's like you're the
cool.
cool doctor.
Yeah.
So here's where my dilemma comes in.
Yeah.
Because I've known you, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the 4 years that we have chatted and messaged and spoken, I have never known what to call you.
Huh. Okay.
I've never. Do I say Deb?
And I think most often you do.
I do, but some people I've heard call you Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've heard people say Deborah very often.
My dad does when I'm in trouble.
Right.
Even
Still?
to this day.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you like to go by when you're not Dr. G? When you're not the brand?
I introduce myself as Debbie. The interesting thing about that is, even as a kid, I've never liked it.
Really?
Like, I've never liked my name. So I tried for a while being Deborah, but that feels a little bit more formal.
It's very formal.
And so
I'm not Stuart.
Right, exactly. And
for a number of reasons. It's not a sexy name.
right, yeah. And
never
Deborah, I think for me, it doesn't feel that way either. And in Israel, where I've spent some time, Deborah's like Hortense. It's like your 85-year-old grandmother's best
Right,
friend
it's the
kind of
person who makes
name.
pies.
Right, exactly. And so it's just, yeah. So
Yeah.
I've always been a little uncomfortable. And it's something that my mom was certain I would get over when I was an adult. And I like who I am. I don't think I have the name that fits me, but at some point, I think in like my early 30s, I decided that didn't matter.
Right.
And that I think we think about people with more than just names.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so when I call you next time,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to say,
And I say, DJ Jazzy Stu,
you
how
say-
are you?
You go, what's up, DJ? I say, what's up, Deb?
Yeah.
I don't want to call you Debbie.
Yeah.
I don't call you Deborah.
Yeah.
And Dr. G, I just feel like I don't want to be part of the brand. I want to be I'm your pal.
I actually really only think that Dr. G makes any sense when I'm behind a microphone.
Right.
Right. Whether that's
Or
studio
you're
on
in
stage
your
or something
clinic
like
or
that.
with your patients.
Right. No, I mean, I always use my patients' last names. If they're 18 or older, even if I know them well, like if you were my patient, I would say, hey, Mr. Saunders, how are you?
I'd be like, yeah, what's up, Saunders? They're like, hey, Saunders.
No,
Just,
and you
Mr.
might
Saunders.
say to me like, oh, call me Stu. And I'll say, I will try to remember, but I may not. Because the thing is that I tell all my students in the office, there's such an icky power differential between a doctor and a patient.
Sure.
I do everything I can to equalize that.
Yeah.
On the flip side, when I'm talking to people about parenting and youth development, it's easier to hear an idea that makes you uncomfortable from someone you feel brings some credibility to it.
Right.
So if I was just Deb when I was on television or on stage, it would make it harder for people to hear my new uncomfortable ideas.
Right.
So if I was just Deb when I was on television or on stage, it would make it harder for people to hear my new uncomfortable ideas.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Because names are important.
Yeah, they do. Words matter.
And I think it's important to ask people what their names are. Because I learned this. We had a guy work for us once in the kitchen at my camp. I run the summer camp, if you don't know that, who listen to this. And we hired this guy to be our kitchen manager. And I knew him from a restaurant in town. And when I went to this restaurant, everyone called him Relish. What's up, Relish? Hey, Relish. And like he'd put on a hamburger, Relish, whatever. And I said, so he came to work the first day, and I was like, hey, Relish, good to see you. He's like, okay, I was really hoping that with this new job, the relishing would disappear. My name's Darren, and I like being called Darren. And I was like, I've never known that. He goes, no one's ever asked me what I like, and relish just stuck. And I always hated it. And I just never got. So I've always taught all the kids I work with, who work with our kids at our camps and our programs. When you're doing name games, ask the kids, what do you want to be called?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, and get that permission for what they want to be called. Because often they're never even asked that.
It's such a sign of respect to ask someone what they want to be called. And if you're not sure you got it, I think human nature is to, if you tell me your name and I think I didn't hear it right or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, my kids, it turns out, all have really hard to pronounce names. I didn't think they were so hard, but it turns out. And when they've noticed that if they say their name and the person is like, oh, nice to meet you, if the person doesn't get it, they won't call them anything.
They
just won't say it.
Nice to meet you.
Ever after that, right? Like other kids, they'll be like, they'll play with them less, or they'll hang out with them less, or they'll call on them less in a game or something like that because they feel embarrassed and then they don't want to ask. And I was talking to a guy recently who's a teacher, and he said at parent-teacher conferences, he said, I'm super disappointed that Google Glasses didn't stick because I wanted every time a parent sat down in front of me to have my Google Glasses just tell me who their kid is and what their name is. Because if you don't ask right away, you're stuck. You can't go back. You can't dial that back.
Yeah. I do the same. I meet people, I'm like, hey.
Right. You.
And I try and place it. Like, I don't know. You know, we meet lots of people in our respective jobs, and I'm always like, and they're like, Stu, and I'm like, hey, how long has it been?
Great to see.
Yeah. When was the last time I saw you?
Yeah.
You know, things like that. To try
Give me a clue. Drop me
here.
A crumb. And so I just say, I reintroduce myself. And that's how I get around it. I say, hey, I'm Debbie. And sometimes I will get, oh yeah, we've met several times. I'm so-and-so. And I say, please forgive me. I just really struggle to remember people's names. Yeah. But I do remember that this about you or that about you. We all want to be seen. Yeah. Right?
And remembered.
Yeah.
We all want to be remembered, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the story. But anyway, that was interesting. But so let's go way back to your life. And I want to just, and we'll kind of do a bit of a abbreviated version of this question. So don't worry about being too long-winded, but I do want to know, where does your story begin in terms of high school, like middle school? Where did you go to middle school? Where did you go to high school? Where did you come from? What is your story? I don't want to know the past college doctor stuff and all that, and all your parenting stuff is important, but where were you in high school and college? Where was that happening?
So my parents and I moved. I went to a new school in a new town every year from first grade to fourth grade. And that made me super good at meeting new people and very bad at maintaining relationships for any length of time. And then I was in fourth and fifth grade living in a suburb outside Chicago, and it was a public school. And in fourth grade, it was fine. And in fifth grade, we started to change classrooms for different teachers for math, social studies, like that. And I was getting picked on for having good grades. And so I was like, well, if I'm smart enough to figure out how to get the best grade in the class, I ought to be able to be smart enough to figure out how to get a middle grade and stop getting all this unwanted attention. Right. So I started getting C's really reliably. And my parents found that completely unacceptable. But my mom was an educator and did something that I think not a lot of parents would do. Instead of just yelling at me or giving me consequences, she said, you and I both know you're capable of doing better in this class with this teacher because you have. Why aren't you? And she actually asked and listened to the answer. Not just, why aren't you? What's wrong with you? But why aren't you? And I told her. I was like, it's not worth it. I said, it makes recess a living nightmare, and I'm totally uninterested. And she said, okay, keep doing what you're doing. And then she went to my dad, and she said, she needs a different educational situation for middle school. Like, this isn't going to work. Because she knew, and she's told me since, that she knew that she could compel me to do better, but she didn't want me to live in fear of them at home and of people at school.
Right.
Also, that wasn't worth it. And that it was fifth grade.
Yeah.
It's just fifth grade. I could get C's while they figured it out. Yeah. So they put me in an independent private school for 6th, 7th, and 8th, and I loathed it. It was awful socially. But academically, it was amazing. So my parents got what they wanted out of it.
You didn't.
I did academically
but
get a lot
socially.
of that. I knew that. Like, I recognized that I was getting a lot out of it academically, but I was the least affluent kid there. I was the one of 2 Jewish kids in the entire school. I was one of 2 kids, two kids to come in at 6th grade. Most of the kids had all been there since kindergarten. It was a K to 12 school. I didn't live geographically near anybody else. And I spent 6th to 8th grade wearing my jacket, like my winter jacket. I never took it off.
Why?
Because it was my protection. I had this
It was
down
a shell.
purple jacket that I put on, I think somewhere in October of my 6th grade year, and wore the entire school day for the next 3 years, no matter the weather. In the back of the room, that's who I was. Academically, I excelled, and socially, I couldn't have been more miserable. And I'm so grateful that I don't struggle with mental health issues, because I'd have been suicidal for sure if I had that. For sure. I couldn't see a way out. So the first light I really saw was that in 8th grade, my parents sat me down and had what they were really worried about, a serious conversation about how they could afford to send me to this school for high school, but it would mean that I would have a lot less choices for college, because financially they could basically do one or the other.
Right.
And, or I could go to the public high school. And before they finished the sentence, I was like, public high school.
Yeah.
I went to public high school.
Yeah.
And so I went to a high school that had over 1,000 kids per grade. My high school was larger in students. Yeah, there were 5,000 students at my high school.
That's huge.
And it was wonderful
Good.
because there were too many kids for there to be popular kids.
Right.
There were just too many kids. It was an
wasn't
entire
a group.
civilization.
Yeah, there wasn't like that one
Right.
group.
Now, within each group, was there a pecking order? 100%. But I could find like-minded humans.
Yeah.
So for me, it was tech theater and chorus and volleyball.
Right.
Right? But also, there were like 7,000 extracurrics. And I got to college with 4 other people, states away, mind you, in Pennsylvania, with 4 other people who'd gone to my high school. I'd only ever met 2 of them.
Really?
That's how big my high school class was.
It's huge.
So I had
1,000
this
is like
opportunity.
mostly high schools are 1,000 people. Like that's advertised for a whole school.
So this is 4 times
Yeah.
that big.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, and I know that for some kids that might have been a terrible situation, but for me, it wasn't that I got lost. It was that I could have enough anonymity at the beginning to figure out what I chose.
Right.
And not who I wanted to be, the brand that I wanted to create, although we weren't talking about it in that way at the time, and who I admired and wanted to be a little vulnerable around, like put any trust in to say what I thought about anything or how I felt about anything. But there's an amazing project called the It Gets Better Project.
I've heard of it, yep.
And the It Gets Better project is meant to encourage primarily, although not solely, LGBTQ kids that, however bad it seems, and it's put together by so many adults, everybody from a pope, President Obama, to Broadway stars and music and video folks and all
And
these people
YouTubers
and YouTubers and
Yeah.
and teens,
Yeah.
everybody saying, yes, it is as bad as you think it is. Hang on, it gets better. And that is so incredibly true. And I never forget, as I watch my kids go through this time, how impossible it is to believe.
Right. It is hard to believe, and that's a challenge we have when I work with young people exclusively,
Yeah.
and have for 27 years because I'm old. And
You don't get to say that to me because we're the same age.
yeah, but I look way older than you do. I have gray. You call me gray.
My beard has almost no gray in it at all.
I'm like from the Lord of the Rings. I'm gray beard. And that's one of the things that I struggle with. We made a movie called Rise Above,
Right.
which was about kids who were bullied, and instead of trying to scare the bully or trying to say just suck it up, we try to say like bullying is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And no 1-hour assembly in a school or no 6-step program is going to change bullying, because it happens in school, happens in the workplace, happens in life, happens in teams.
Yeah.
It's right. And I said, but you can rise above it, because there's life after this chapter of your life. And so that was the whole point of Rise Above, was to teach kids that there's more to this. You're going to be okay. And they need to have examples of that. But this is not what it's about, but I'm agreeing with what you're saying on that. That's really important. So you finished high school. Were you honor roll? Were you like top of the class?
I was in the highest level classes. Our high school tracked kids, and in ways that I'm not sure they do exactly now, but they tracked us, and so I was in track 4 classes. And none of the people I chose to hang out with socially were in those classes.
Interesting. Why?
2 reasons. The kids in those classes, especially by the time I got to junior and senior year, and it was all AP classes, they were working they were so driven, and they were so academically successful Sunday night to Thursday. And then Thursday night, they would just start to abuse substance after substance after substance to relieve the stress. And I was terrified of that. Like, that was both uninteresting to me intellectually and terrifying to me emotionally.
Yeah.
So even when I had to be in study groups with people for AP classes and projects and things, I went through unbelievable machinations and lies about family commitments and things to get out of those situations, because I was pretty sure I could say no, but I didn't want to deal with the fallout, and I just didn't want to be around it. It's like I very much don't enjoy being in casinos because there's so much pain that people are dealing with in casinos often. And in that same way, there just seemed to be so much angst and pain that people were facing.
Yeah.
So for me, I found the loves of my life, and I mean that like in terms of both passions of things to do and the people that really spoke to me and that I could connect with at overnight camp. And in the activities, finding like-minded people is so much easier when you find something that you all care about. Then it's really much easier to make connections.
Yeah.
And often in AP physics, like you're there because you need to be there, but it's usually not something you're tremendously passionate about.
It's true. Yeah, exactly.
There are a few people who are, and that's awesome because we need spaceships and
Right.
things like that. But like in general, I found it by thinking, what do I care about and I want to spend my time doing? And when you get to hang out with other people who feel that same way about that same thing, you already have a ton of common ground.
Yeah. It's so true. Where'd you go to college?
I went to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, which turned out to have fewer undergraduate students than there had been high school students where I went to high school.
There are fewer undergraduate students
at my university than there'd been students in my high school.
Wow.
So there were only 4,000 undergrads, and I came from 5,000 high school.
Wow. Carnegie Mellon it's a pretty famous university.
It is in the States, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's where Randy Posh, didn't he teach Randy Posh out there? The last lecture?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what made you want to get into medicine?
So, I mean, just to not skip a step so that it makes sense.
Keep going. Keep the steps.
I went to undergrad for theater. So I went to a conservatory program where I spent 4 years taking all theater classes. I had almost no other requirements. I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater, and I worked in theater for about 6 years. I hadn't thought of being a doctor since
when you worked in theater, what did you do?
So I performed, and I was a stage manager and a lighting designer and a technical director. I got my union card in the Actors Equity Association.
Wow.
And I hadn't really thought about being a doctor since like grade 9 biology, when I thought the fetal pig was gross and went, well, I guess medicine's out.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wasn't thinking about med school. I was really thinking theater is interesting and it's a good use of my skill set. You get to be a creative problem solver, and I really enjoy this stuff.
And super secure too as a job.
Oh yeah. My parents were thrilled, as you might imagine. And and you're kind of working your job, plus you're auditioning or applying for jobs, 2 jobs, hence because everything only lasts 2 or 3 months. And I get to move around a lot, which I had experience with and I really like doing. And then I landed this amazing job in theater that was like, I was like 15 years too young for. I got hired at Second City Theater Company to be a part of one of the national touring companies when I was 23.
Wow.
And there were a couple of people that young in the touring company, but then the person above me in the hierarchy, and I was stage managing at this point at Second City, the person who was stage managing the smallest of the 3 resident permanent stages got fired under very suspicious illegal circumstances, and I got promoted after 5 weeks with the national touring company. So now I am by far the youngest person in my company. In a Second City company at the time, and even still, there are 8 people in the company. There are 6 people on stage, a musical director and the stage manager, and that's it. And you work together to create the show and also the improv sets afterwards. Right. And then I started understudying onto the ETC, which is the second largest resident stage and the main stage. And I got to work with some really cool people who now have super famous jobs. And I was like, this is it. I mean, there are other good jobs at this level in theater. It was 50 weeks a year. It was paid health insurance, paid vacations. I worked at Second City with these incredible people. Yeah. And I did it for a couple of years, and I realized I couldn't do it forever. And the guy I'd replaced had been there 27 years before the legal difficulties. Right. And you should definitely not sell drugs in the theater.
Top 10 things not to do.
Not to do, not job security that way. And I thought I could do this for a while longer, but it's not what I want to do in the world to solve problems. Like, what do I want to do? Right. And I thought, well, I'd volunteered as an EMT, an emergency medical technician on an ambulance for a while. And I thought, well, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed helping people, being there in the middle of the drama and the excitement of the emergency, driving out to the scene, fighting for, what people needed. Maybe I'll be a paramedic because that's a level up and it pays a little better. And I called a couple of friends who are paramedics, professional, lifelong. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And they knew me pretty well. And each of them independently said, that's a terrible idea. You'd be a terrible paramedic. Why? And I was so shocked and offended and hurt by that. And they each said, you just try and change the system. Like being a paramedic.
Too disruptive?
Yeah, you have to follow protocols. And they're like, you're always trying to think of a different way to do things or argue with people.
You're a disruptor.
Just go be a doctor. That they said, just skip a step, just skip a few steps, go to medical school.
Right.
It's the only, you have to be in charge. And it turns out I'm a terrible team player.
You're a lone wolf.
No, I really like to work with people. I just want them to work for me.
Right. You need to be in charge.
Right, which is really a
You guys
terrible
have
thing to
direction.
say, right? Doesn't that sound really embarrassing?
It's
First
hard to
evaluation,
recognize.
right? As a first evaluation I
Yeah.
ever got as a doctor was after a couple of years of being there, and my boss said to me, you're not a very good team player. And I was really hurt and really offended. And I said to someone who's very close to me, I was like, my boss said I'm not a good team player. And he put his hand on my hand and he said, did she tell you about the sky being blue also?
Captain Obvious. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I really enjoy working with people and I care about what they have to say. But if I lose my autonomy, I kind of lose my mind.
Right.
And so it turns out being a doctor is useful. So is being an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, all the responsibility rests with me, but so does the autonomy.
Right.
And it turns out I kind of am who I am, like ever since 6th grade.
Wow. So that's how you got into being a doctor.
Yeah.
So you graduate from your doctor. Let's just fast forward a bit.
Yeah, med school residency, all that.
Done. And you become a doctor where? Where do you start your career?
In a rural area in Pennsylvania called Armstrong County.
And is that where you still are?
Nope. I worked there for 3 years in a really rural practice, taking care of a lot of really wonderful people and being taught by and learning with a lot of really wonderful people. And then I got a call that a federally qualified health center, which is the state's answer to all the problems we have with medical care, it is a health center for people who are uninsured or undocumented, was opening up 2 miles from my home. And would I consider applying for that job? And so I was commuting about an hour where I was working, and the idea of working at a place that had a mission that I really believed in and was so close to my home seemed really great. And so I've been there since we opened.
For somebody who doesn't know, you say it's the state's answer for undocumented and uninsured people.
Yeah.
So if I'm just a regular Joe, I can walk in there and get healthcare?
You can sign up and I can be your doctor. Absolutely. So you have to come in and say, I want you to be my primary doctor. It's not quite as involved as it is in Canada of having to sign up ahead of time and get permission and then you can go. But we're not a walk-in clinic. You wouldn't be like, oh, I have another doctor, but my eye hurts and I'm walking by. That's an urgent care center. But I am somebody's family doc. So I mostly see kids, 65, 70%. And then I also see their parents and their grandparents. And in a few cool cases, their great-grandparents.
Really?
Yeah.
And so, and you love that?
I really do.
And you're doing that. So you're doing that, and that's still your primary job.
I actually only do that 25% time. I haven't worked full time since I finished residency because I have 4 kids.
Yes.
And I was building that.
Yes.
And even now that we were filling our nest and now we're slowly emptying our nest, because I started this other work, I never want to give up seeing patients in the office, but I think I'm doing more good in the world with the other work that I do. So
Right.
I keep working 25% time teaching medical students and seeing patients. But outside of that, I do this other work talking to parents and students.
And anybody who will listen to you.
Anyone. Yes, people on buses, planes, especially airplanes, I think.
So
I'm really difficult to sit next to.
Well, you're a talker.
Yeah.
Which is cool, because I am too. So here's my question for you. What do you think in all what you're doing now in your current quote-unquote job? It's more of a mission, I think, sometimes, like what you're doing. And what do you think is the biggest challenge right now for young people and for parents? If you could, I know it's kind of two completely different things. Well, let's break it down. What's the biggest thing right now for kids, let's say high school age students, going through life? What is the thing you're seeing that you're noticing when you're working with these people?
So there's pressures on them and the obstacles that they face. And the biggest pressures that I see on students have to do, honestly, with trauma and financial stressors and things that are beyond their control, right? I was talking with one of the other amazing speakers from here last night, Allison, about sexual assault and sexual victimization and trauma. And that is something that so too many teens face, living in chaos that they don't have the resources to fix. And so that's on adults to talk about. But for students who might be listening, I think that the biggest challenge that they can change is their perception, how they're perceived by the adults in their lives. Because like it or not, one of the coolest things about being an adult is autonomy. And teens are still earning that autonomy, right? They don't just automatically have it. Even if they feel like they should, they don't. And so if they can change, if they can recognize and work for positive change in how they're perceived by adults, then they will be able to live their passions and carry out their missions. But if they feel either like, well, if that's what you think about me, I'm not going to try and change your mind, that's self-defeatist. Whether it should have to be like this or not, that's self-defeatist. And every student that I've had the chance to talk to here at this conference, all the students that I've gotten to work with around North America, they have a clear picture in some slice of a change they want to affect, of something that they see as a mistake that's been made or a wrong or a situation that could just be better, whether it's they know a way to do music better or they know a way to design race cars better or create a video game that's better or bring people together or a social justice issue that they want to face. And the obstacles that they usually face have to do with some adult that won't give them that autonomy because of their perceptions and their beliefs about that kid. Doesn't mean the adult's wrong. That might be a kid who isn't yet demonstrating enough responsibility or respect for others or care for their own health or ability to prioritize, right? They might not be there yet. But if they can see how they're seen, compare that to how they want to be seen, and then take the steps they need to let other people see their authentic selves and make their authentic selves worthy of the things they want to do, I think they could totally accomplish
100%.
all the things that would make the world better.
Yeah, 100%. And look at that. You look at like what's happening in Parkland.
Yeah.
And those young people who are just like schooling adults.
Yeah.
They're just schooling.
Oh, it's so good. The New Yorker did an interview with Emma Gonzalez from that, and she was phenomenal.
Yeah, and you just think like, and I think some of the things that, paraphrasing obviously, like, you're the adults, we're the children. Yeah. You should be making these decisions.
But if you're not going to protect us, we'll protect us.
We're going to do it. Like, why are we having to? And it was really, I thought that was, everyone I've talked to about it during all this podcast that we've been recording, and everybody regardless of their political stripe, all agree, like, those kids are ridiculously inspiring, and you can't ignore them.
And what I want to say to adults is, those kids aren't rare.
No, I just had a fellow speaker who does not work with young people. Mostly 95% works with adults. Had a chance to work with some young people and made the comment. She said that I spoke to these students and I was like so impressed and surprised how engaged they were and how like they were like so like the conversation was so interesting. I'm like, yeah, because young people who've always made change. It's always the young people in the 60s and the 70s and the Vietnam War. Those were all young people who made those changes. It wasn't the 70-year-olds and the 6-year-olds that were riding in the streets to change things. It was the young people. They're and it's going to be again. Anyway, so here's something else about that. So follow that up with we met through camping. We weren't camping together, but through summer camping. And I saw you speak at an event, and that's where we connected. And I'm constantly asked by everybody, what's wrong with kids today? Why are they so apathetic, entitled, disconnected? And I always say, and I don't always say, but everyone always blames the parents. Well, it's the parents'
and their
fault.
cell phones.
It's always technology.
Parents and their cell phones.
Technology and parents.
Yes.
Technology and parents. They're hand in hand.
Right.
They're one and the same. How do you feel it? Do you think that's a real? I mean, I do believe there is some serious challenging in parenting these days. And a lot of it has to do with kids comparing themselves online socially with everything else going on. And like, you can't, I would say, Mom, so-and-so has this. Why can't I have it? And she'd be like, he doesn't have it. And I know that because I know his mom. But now kids are like, my own kids like, can I have this? I'm like, nobody else has it. I'm like, no, seriously, here's my Instagram feed. They've all got one. And I'm like, I can't argue with that. There's the picture proof, right? So what do you think? What is that challenge? Is it parents? Is it technology? Is it both?
First, I would say that just like you and I know that most kids aren't apathetic, disengaged, all those things, that 99% of the parents that I've ever met professionally or personally care tremendously about their kids' well-being. Do want to be really good at this, want to raise kids who will be adults they themselves admire. So we can't say parents don't care or they're not trying or they're not interested. We know they are.
Right.
They're terribly afraid.
Terribly afraid.
And we're not wrong to be afraid. First of all, being afraid for our kids has kept them alive, right? Like there's no more helpless species than the human newborn. You have to be hypervigilant. And then we know at some point we have to let them go, but we don't get a lot of mild posts about how we're supposed to do that. How do we get from watching every yawn and taking care of every poop to, hey, I saw your feed. I'll tell you about that when we have lunch on Sunday.
Right.
How are we supposed to make that jump? And because we're not told how, and we don't any longer live in tight communities for the most part, where we see, most kids around this age are walking by themselves. Okay, most kids around this age are watching their younger siblings. Most kids around this age handle all the meal prep for the parents when they get home from work, right? We're not as, even though we seem in some ways more intimately involved in each other's lives, there's a lot more that's hidden.
Right.
And So we're not as clued into those kind of social norms. And our social norm has changed. One of the big problems that I think stems from when I was growing up, if my mom said to me at the beginning of the day, remember, after school today, you're riding your bike over to gymnastics, and then you're going over to the neighbor's house to do this thing, and then I'll meet you here by 7. And if she was driving down our street at 7 and I hadn't called her, she assumed everything had gone as planned. No news was good news. Can you imagine that now?
No.
You'll get home from school, you'll text me. When you're leaving for gymnastics, you'll text me. I'll remind you to take your gymnastics gym bag. When you get to gymnastics, I need to hear from you that you got there. When you're leaving gymnastics, you go over to the neighbor. I need you to text me, right? We've gotten to this point that if I don't hear from you, you must be dead.
Yeah, 100%. Micromanaging their lives every
right?
second of the way.
And just checking in, even if I'm not telling you exactly what to do. But like, I haven't heard from them in 2 hours. If I was driving home, I'd be like, oh, I haven't heard. How could I not realize I hadn't heard from them? Are they dead? That's a huge problem for us as parents. We have to go back to remembering.
We can't go back though, can we? There's no way to reverse.
So, okay, I agree. Nothing goes backwards. But I think we can move forward to having more faith in our kids and just taking a half a step back. And what I talk to parents all the time about is empathy, interest, without intervention. That fear is a big problem because that fear leads us to spoil our kids backwards with stuff and achievements, like opportunities to achieve, but we are completely withholding and stingy about autonomy and chances for failure.
I also think we're not letting kids just have no plan. And what I mean by that is when I went to summer camp as a child, my mom was like, you're going to summer camp. And I went to summer camp. I don't think she had a clue what we did. I'm like, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know. Probably do some craft, maybe some canoeing, maybe a campfire. I don't know.
You should bring a swimsuit.
Yeah, you're going to summer camp, right? That was it. There wasn't, the packing list was like shoes, socks, underwear, toothbrush, some swim trunks.
Please label everything.
Yeah, but it wasn't even like sunscreen because this is a long time ago.
Right.
It was the 70s and 80s. It wasn't like bring sunscreen.
Well, you could bring baby oil, I think, if you want to get more tan.
Yeah, Hawaiian Tropic 4, whatever. That's not SUV. SV, what is that? I don't know. SUVs are trucks. Anyway, and so now when parents call me, it's like, what are my kids going to do every day, hour by hour, minute by minute?
But
what
it's
are they going to do?
So will I get my money back?
Or this is the best. I get parents because the internet. They'll call me and they'll call our office and say, I was looking at the Weather Network, and it says there's some bad weather. What is your plan? And my administrator, who's amazing, one time a parent called and said, there are high winds and a storm coming. What is your, a thunderstorm warning, whatever it was. What is your plan? And she said, well, our plan is we're going to take all the kids out in the soccer field, and we're going to give them all a metal pole, in which the strongest ones will survive. And she goes, really? She goes, well, no, not really. Some will go in the lake. And she's like, what? She's like, I'm kidding. They're all indoors. They're all fine. Everything's great. Like, we know it's bad weather.
Unless your child is the tallest, your child will be fine.
Yes, exactly. But she's like, we know it's bad weather because we're here.
Right, and we have windows.
Yes, we're experiencing the bad weather. We're not looking at the Weather Network because our Wi-Fi sucks anyway, and our cell phone signals suck. But it's a challenge, right? Like we had a parent one time. I don't want to get too much about this. I don't want to talk too much, but we had a parent once because we have these email systems where parents can email their children to camp, which I struggle with. I'm a struggle bus on that. And if anybody goes to my camp, know that I am a struggle bus with that. And we had a parent who had emailed their child at 6 p.m. on a Sunday night of camp, 2-week program, and didn't hear back from them. Because what we do is once a day we print out the emails. They can handwrite them. We scan them back in. They go back to the parents.
I'm familiar with the sad
it's
system.
It's called Bunk One.
Yeah.
And I've always struggled with it, but parents demand it, right? And I'm like, I gotta, you gotta just try to appease them.
Right.
So we get dinner time. We give out we go around the dining hall and we say, hand them all out, and the return form. And this young kid, I think he was 13 years old, didn't reply because he was having fun.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, I gotta go. We're going down canoeing. I'll throw it in my bunk and I'll do it later. Right.
I will never do it.
Right? Hashtag never do it. Hashtag I'm not running home, Mom.
Yeah.
And so at midnight, she emails us, Ash, our assistant camp director at the time, and it's like, I have not heard from my son. Is everything okay? And Ash was in bed.
Right.
And didn't see the email because it was directly to her. And she's gone to sleep. It's midnight.
Yes.
6 o'clock in the morning, Ash's phone rings. And it says, hi, it's so-and-so's mom. I'm on the basketball court. Is my son okay? 6 o'clock in the morning. So
I drove to your camp.
3-hour drive. So Ash stumbles out of bed, puts on the baseball cap because her hair is everywhere, and so I think she still had her onesie on. Wandered out to the basketball court, and she's like, "We have not heard back. It was 6:00 last night. It's been 12 hours, and I need to see him. I need proof of life." So she's like, "Okay." So Ash has to go at 6:00, wake up the camper who's fully asleep in their cabin at 6 a.m. and say, Steve, that wasn't his name, can you come outside? What? Why? Well, your mom's here.
Which is the 13-year-old kiss of death.
Yeah, but he's like, "Is everything okay with my mom?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, just come outside. She's fine."
I mean, nothing's worse than usual, honey. Come on out.
And then there's the dad leaning up against the car, like going, "Oh gosh, like this is." I feel so. My son is like, and I just had to see you, and he's like, "Mom, I was just having fun. I didn't. Sorry, I have time to write you back." And they got back in the car and they left and they drove the 3 hours home again. And
I bet that was a comfy car ride.
Oh my gosh! And the 13-year-old boy, 12 or 13, he says to Ash, "Do a lot of parents do that?" And Ash is like, "No." But without making him feel bad.
Yeah.
But it was like, that was a crazy moment to watch this all go down.
And that level of fear, you can have total empathy for that mom's fear, right? Whatever drove her at 3:00 in the morning to wake her partner and convince them that this is what had to happen.
Yeah.
That level of vigilance in certain situations that some families face is necessary for everyone to be safe. But that level of vigilance is harming our kids.
Sure.
And it's harming us as parents. It's stripping all the joy. It's not all joy raising kids. You and I both raise kids. I get that. But some of it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
They're really lovely and there's a lot to enjoy about it. Also, when your child gets to go away to camp, there's a lot to enjoy about that as well.
The independence, learning.
For them. And the time off for you as a parent.
Yeah. It should be a vacation. Enjoy yourself.
Right. Enjoy, reconnect with your spouse. Take some time for yourself that maybe you're not comfortable taking when your kid's around.
Go for dinner.
I'm actually working on a bundle of resources for parents about sending new campers to sleepaway camp. And I'm doing it because I think that parents aren't getting out of this experience what they could. And I don't just mean like a Caribbean vacation. I mean like the practice before your kid moves out, the practice in little bits of having our kids be away from us and them seeing and us seeing that they're okay, that we've done a good job. Yeah. My eldest son is spending his 10th grade year abroad. He's about 6,000 miles from home. And parents would say to me last summer when he would be places and say he was doing this, and his friends' parents would be like, "Wow, aren't you scared?" And he would say, "No, I've been to overnight camp for 5 summers. I know I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Won't you miss your family?" And he'd say, "Yeah, I know I will."
Yeah.
Right? Not like I won't miss them, just I will. And then they would say to me, somewhat accusatorily, "Aren't you going to miss him?"
Yeah, you better, right? You're going to, right?
Well, like, and although a piece of me wanted to say, "Oh no, I have 3 more just like him. It'll be fine." But of course I would miss him. I miss him like a limb. But isn't that my job?
Yeah.
Isn't it practice to know that, hey, I did what I was supposed to do. Like I've given him a lot of skills, not everything. He's coming home for grade 11, so he can get a little bit more nurturing, a little bit more cooking before I think he's totally ready.
Yeah.
But it's good practice to give kids the chance to walk to the store and back, stay over at a friend's house for a night, go be with their grandparents for a week, go to overnight camp. We all need practice separating that isn't forever. So that they can see they can handle it and we can see we can handle it. There's
a great stat I heard, and I'm totally, 73.2% of all facts are made up on the spot.
Yes.
Or stats are made up on the spot, but I know this one is what it was. But it was, I believe it was 75%. Sorry, by the time a child turns 18 years old, they have spent 75% of the time they will spend with their parents.
That makes sense.
So after 18 is the last quarter.
Stretched out over their whole adulthood.
The rest of their lives. So by the time they're 18, they've spent 75% of their lives with their parents. The rest of it is all spread out over the next 50, 60, 75 years. And that is a scary thing as a parent to think. Now, I think to myself, I heard that stat. It was Tim Ferriss had mentioned it. I read it. Or no, it wasn't. I read it anyway. And I got thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I don't see my mom. And she calls and I roll my eyes. And I'm like, what is the problem? You didn't, what's wrong with the iPad?
What tech problem can I fix for you?
My mom will call and say, your dad broke Skype. And I want to say he doesn't have that much power. He didn't break Skype. He just
That's
deleted
not how
it.
Skype works.
He deleted it from the iPad because he held the button too long and it started to shake and he hit the button and it disappeared. That's what happened. I have to drive the half an hour over and fix the Skype and you're incredible. I'm not incredible, Mom.
The 12-year-old who lives next door could also have fixed the
exactly.
Skype.
But it's an interesting stat. And I think that's part of parents get this concern of I've got to hold on because it will be gone soon.
It's hard to have planned obsolescence in your role in your kids' lives. Not that we don't stop being in our kids' lives. There's no victory lap in parenting.
No.
But my role as the nurturer, as the decider, as the source of all information and the giver of all boundaries and the enforcer of all boundaries and all that stuff, all those things are going to go away. They're supposed to. But two things. One is, if you don't have other ways you see yourself, then you're not sure who you are without that. And two, if you don't like the adult your kid is becoming, you won't like your new roles with them, because your new roles with them are to listen and be interested, and maybe if you're lucky, hang out, spend some time, ask them for favors on occasion.
Fix the Skype.
Right. If you don't like this adult that your kid has become, then those things aren't rewarding.
Right.
But one of my sessions this morning, when I asked, why do we say no to kids so much when they ask for these opportunities? And one woman said, because we lose control. And it's an illusion of control, but it is a comforting illusion.
I'm in charge. I'm in control. Yeah. Where do you want to be in 5 years? We're jumping here for a second, but
the goal in my work, I want to change the conversation that we have in North America about what kids are capable of doing for themselves. And that's a big ask. In 1992, if you had a female friend who was taking care of her kids and going to work and had a parent who was ill, and you said to her, Susie, what are you doing to take care of yourself? She'd have looked at you like you had three heads. That was not, women's self-care was not a thing. Now, if you said that to her, she might at least, even if she wasn't doing anything, she might say, oh, I know, I should go back to my yoga class or something, right? Oprah did that. That cultural change in North America happened because of the Oprah Network.
Yeah.
And she set out to make women's self-care a thing.
Yeah.
And
Bring
I'm
it to
no
the
Oprah.
forefront. Yeah.
I'm no Oprah, but I'm also not the only person trying to have this conversation in our country. And events like the one that you've created and the network of professionals that you guys have really germinated, these are all people who are trying to change the conversation that we have. So that right now, if I'm on a playground talking to another parent about their grade 4 student, and that student is struggling with their math teacher, right? Like that kid asks a question and the teacher ignores them or makes fun of them, and it's a really bad situation. If I were to say to that parent, what's your child doing about this? They'd look at me like I had three heads. No, I'm talking to the teacher. I talk to the principal. I'm looking at new schools for that kid to go to. 10 years from now, I want that other parent, when I say, well, what's your kid doing to repair this relationship? I want them to at least say, oh, yeah, he should.
Yeah. So if you could send a text message
To the whole world?
to the whole world that said one succinct thing, for me, I won't tell you what mine is because I don't want to.
Sure.
I don't want to.
Although I'm interested.
Mine would be kind.
Nice.
All at once, the entire world saw it. Be kind. And someone else said an interesting one that was, "You're not alone." And I thought that's a huge one too. Like,
Yeah.
You're not alone. And people feel often mental health issues come from feeling alone.
Yeah.
And there's always someone else who's struggling like you are. You just have to reach out. So what would yours be?
Empathy without intervention.
I love that. Do you want to just throw a brief explanation what you think that means? Because I think I know what it means.
98% of the time, what the person in your life, and I'm thinking about kids and teens and young adults, but it might be your adult sibling or your friend or your partner. 98% of the time, the people that we care about, that we're in it with, like I'm in, whatever's going on with you, I want to hear I'm in. They don't need us to protect them with our body or our voice or our actions. 98% of the time, they need our empathy, but not our intervention.
Right.
They need to know we're in, that we feel it, that we care, that we'll tomorrow, if we haven't heard from them to know what the rest of the story was, we'll be thinking about it in the shower. Be like, I wonder how that struggle Stu was facing, how that turned out. I got to remember to text him and ask. We're in.
Yeah.
But we don't actually need someone to fix it for us. And if we had that behavior in general, if that was like our baseline behavior, then we would do that for kids more.
Yeah.
When they said, my math teacher's so unreasonable, we'd say, oh, that's so frustrating.
Love it. Where can people get a hold of you? What are the digits?
AskDrG.com.
Yeah. And Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah, Ask Doc G, Ask Dr. G. But if you look at AskDrG.com, you'll find pretty much all the things. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You rock. Done.
And my boss said to me, you're not a very good team player. And I was really hurt and really offended. And I said to someone who's very close to me, I was like, my boss said I'm not a good team player. And he put his hand on my hand and he said, did she tell you about the sky being blue also?
Captain Obvious. Yeah.